Worried your SaaS offering isn't priced right? You're not alone. Pricing is perhaps the most difficult nut to crack in SaaS. Let's meet an expert in this episode of Closing Time. Thanks for tuning into Closing Time, the show for go-to-market leaders. I'm Val Riley, head of marketing for Unbounce and Insightly. Today, I'm joined by Bill Wilson. He is founder and CEO of Pace Pricing, a B2B SaaS pricing consultancy. Welcome to the show, Bill.
Hi, Val. It's great to be here. Thanks.
So, Bill, I've been in this business since the birth of SaaS. I'm not ashamed to say. I can remember pricing conversations, actually debates, really, that I was having back in 2012. Suffice it to say that this is a hot button issue. Why is pricing so challenging?
That's a great question, and you and I are come from the same place there. I've been in rooms with these conversations for a long time. I think the biggest reason is that it starts to tinker directly with the relationship between you and your customers, and that always feels a little bit uncomfortable. So I think people naturally fear pricing changes or conversations about pricing because it feels like once it's set, it's so delicate. How can we possibly change it? Save maybe a price increase. But when it comes to actually having those conversations, no one really wants to upset customers, and I think there's a lot of anxiety and fear built into pricing, and primarily I think it's just due to just those unknowns. Just we're afraid of what we don't know, and I think that's what ends up happening a lot is people don't know how people are going to react. They don't know how the market's going to react. They don't know how their existing customers are going to react. Is everybody going to churn? They have all these fears, and so I think that's probably the biggest reason it becomes a hot button issue. It becomes very everybody has an opinion on it because of that.
All of that resonates with me. Let's start with the basics. How about that? Who
Sure.
in a SaaS company owns pricing? Meaning, what member of the leadership team in an organization should be in charge of it?
Right. Yeah, I think it varies depending on the company, but at the end of the day, the decision is going to end with the CEO probably, depending on the size of the company. So CEO is highly involved. Head of product, for sure, I would say is heavily involved in the deciding factors. But yeah, mostly what I see is there's always the C-level, and usually the CEO is making that sort of final decision. Yes, this is the model we'll go with. Yes, this is how we're going to do it. But the team itself is cross-functional. And I think that's probably the most important piece is that you've got representation from product, you've got representation from marketing, customer success, sales, sometimes operations like finance, like revenue operations, of course. All of those people need to come together to make true, good, data-backed pricing decisions. And I think that's the thing I see the most in these companies is there isn't that group. The pricing function is delegated to one person. And if you can build a group of people together in your organization to actually start having conversations about pricing, I think that will put you streets ahead of many other companies.
And you're putting product at the helm essentially because if we're building a feature, right, we need to know how we're going to monetize that feature, or else why build the feature? Is that why product is kind of at the center?
100%. I think product is one of those pieces that they're taking in all the information from the customers. They're having those interviews. They're getting all the data. They understand the product from that level. They're taking in data from sales and marketing, all these places. And I think if they're going to build something, then one of the top 3 questions they need to be asking is, how are we going to monetize this before they even build it? And if we're not, I think we're making a big mistake because I've seen this before where, we'll build out features and then we'll go, cool, like, where does this fit? And that's the wrong time to have the conversation because a number of, the monetization discussion can even impact what the feature is or how it's implemented. So I think that's why I put so much, power in the product person's hand, not just because I'm a product person, but that's where I think it lies. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So in your experience, tell me, what are some things that SaaS companies typically get wrong about pricing?
I think the biggest thing people get wrong, we've touched on this a little bit already, is that they just don't change it. I think that's probably the biggest mistake I see in pricing is people not changing their price at all. It can be years. It's not uncommon for me to talk to founders and ask the question, when was the last time you changed your pricing? And they either can't remember, or they'll be like, yeah, it's been many, many years.
I feel like you have a cheat sheet behind the curtain of every SaaS company I've worked for, because we've always had these people are on the 2016 pricing and these people are on the, the pricing that's groups of users as opposed to by user. It makes me feel good that maybe it's systemic and it's not just the organizations I've worked for. So thank you for that. Okay. So we just covered what folks get wrong about pricing, but how do you know if you're getting your pricing right? What are some indicators?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think this one thing I've noticed recently is that at the very beginning, say you start off with a small, smaller contract, mid-market, and say you're charging per user. This is a classic example. It'll feel fine, right? The value connection feels fine. It's like, yeah, no problem. We can have 50 users on it and we'll move forward. But as that account grows and grows and grows, what I've seen is this slight deviation over time between what they're paying and what they're getting. And then all of a sudden it trips the switch where they all of a sudden don't feel like it's fair. And so I think that's one of the ways that you can tell if you've got pricing right, is that if the value correlation stays with the account as the account grows. Because if you do start to get that diversion, then that's when you start to see churn. And that's the function of churn. It's like at one point they saw value in the software and they were happy to pay you for it. So what happened? And so I think the big indications that you're getting it right is, reasonably low churn, high NPS scores, and that value connection stays as customers grow. They still feel like it's fair, predictable, familiar, like all of those things. So I think some of those are big indicators. So like value alignment is really, really important. And then value capture is the other way you've got pricing right. So what I mean by value capture is that, okay, we are aligned here, but are we capturing all the areas we can possibly capture? And usually a good hint for that for me is, net dollar retention, well above 100%, which basically means we have good expansion motion inside the packages. And I think that's another really great way to tell that if you've got some things right. So yeah, value capture, value alignment. And then, of course, there's pricing ability inside the organization. Are we monitoring it? What are we monitoring? What decisions are we making about pricing on a quarterly basis? And so if you've got all three of those things working really, really well, then I think that's when you have a pretty good handle on your pricing structure and it's working.
I like the fact that you've mentioned things like NPS and NRR, because these are things that SaaS businesses are already measuring. So you're not asking us to go out and reinvent the wheel and find a new metric. You're saying these are the existing metrics you probably have that can give you an indication that your pricing is on target.
Oh, 100%. And I think that's one of the biggest things. I really try hard to work with let's work with the data you have. I think the biggest thing I see, or the only piece of data we find sometimes that people just don't have, is usage data around, features and functionality. And that's sort of an eye opener for product teams, and they usually go implement it almost immediately. And once you have that, you've got all the makings to be able to make all the decisions you need to really confidently.
Nice. Okay. That's encouraging. I'd like to switch gears to talk a little bit about the elephant in the room, the dreaded pricing page. This is something that I feel we in SaaS are always iterating on. It never feels like it's done. How do you approach the pricing page when you're in engagements with clients?
Sure. I believe the pricing page is probably one of the hardest working pages on your website. And so therefore, I think it needs to be treated with the exact same level of care and detail as, say, your landing, like your actual homepage. So for me, I look at it. I've tried to figure this out over the years, and I've come up with a way of looking at it that tries to keep it as objective as possible. So I look at it through a couple of lenses. I look at pricing pages through the idea of just clarity. How clear is it about who it's for and what I'm going to get? So that's sort of like the first stage. And then I look at confidence. It's like, how well are we building confidence in the buyer as they are navigating the page? So those two things I think are probably the most important, because one, a confused mind never buys. So it's got to be super clear. And people love to find people that look just like them and go, oh, if it worked for them, it's going to work for me. And that builds confidence and trust. And so if we've got those two things right, then we can start looking at what's going on in the packaging, and how are we getting to action? And I think that's the other two pieces. So packaging and action. So I try and, look at everything through those lenses as I go through the pages. But, some of the big things I see that people miss, and I'll just highlight some of the ones that people miss all the time, is the top of the pricing page will just say pricing, or it will say, pricing for every size company, or pricing to fit your needs, or something like that. I would suggest that everybody knows they're on a pricing page, and we don't need to talk about the fact that it's a pricing page. What I would do is I would reiterate your value prop. Your best value prop should be at the top of that page. Who is it for? What am I going to get? And right underneath that, do as best you can at risk reversal. So free trial, no credit card required. 30-day money back guarantee, trusted by thousands of companies, little logo, little logo, little logo, like whatever it takes to try and get people framed properly that this is the value I'm going to get, and this is why you should trust us. That's probably the number one thing I see that I flag. And then after that, it's using language customers just don't understand, right? We will all come up with our own jargon and, words concatenated together that don't really mean anything to anybody else but us. And we're so used to it in our organization that of course it makes sense. So we become blind to some of this stuff. So I think I just try and tell people, clear over clever, don't get cute. You can call it whatever you want, but just make sure they 100% understand it. They're not in your world yet, so they don't understand what clear sight is, or whatever the thing is you've called it. You need to be really, really clear. And sometimes it feels rudimentary, but I think that's way better than the opposite. So those are the big things I see. Not surfacing the most important features first in their grids, like what's different, is probably the biggest thing. And then my last one that I absolutely hate is the giant feature grid comparison on the pricing page. Now, everybody's going to say, that's the point of a pricing page. Why are you saying that? I'm saying, absolutely. Let's surface the most important things that differentiate these packages for the various personas, the jobs to be done, whatever way we are slicing up those packages, and then let people who want to go deep, go deep. So have a button that says view all features, or put it in each plan. And when they click on it, you get a light box, and then it just stays there. You can scroll inside it, and then you can close it when you're done and you're right where you left off. And I think that gets us a nice balance between the people who are really just trying to make a decision and decide if this is right for me, and those people who really want to go deep and compare it because they've been looking at competitors or whatever it happens to be. So I think those are the things that I said a couple, but that was like 4, but there's many more.
Yes, I'm sure there are. I mean, everything you said, I could just visualize in my head, how different companies approach the pricing page. And it's a never ending task. I mean, we are currently doing some A/B testing on our page, and I feel like that's the page that you could A/B test in perpetuity and still find incremental wins, because there's so much happening on that page. So that was really great insight.
Yeah, there's never right. It's never right. It's just optimal. So how do we get it to be optimal for the time period? Yeah.
Got it. Okay. I think I'm going to use that phrase also. So as part of that pricing page, companies come up with tiers. Is there a way that you coach folks on how to create those pricing tiers and how to differentiate them?
Yeah. I think a lot of SaaS companies, especially when they first start, they will think they need to do this sort of good, better, best, small, medium, large kind of packaging structure. And you can almost see this when you go to certain pages and you realize that there's not a lot of differentiation, and they're just reaching to have the separation. Now, that's fine. And I think what it does, though, is people get into these conversations going, well, what should be in the basic plan and what should be in the mid plan? We want everybody in the mid plan. We know that. So let's make sure most features are there. But what do we strip out of the base plan? And that's, to me, it seems like the wrong conversation. What I'd rather do is figure out, who it is we're serving the best, how they get to value. Those are the 2 biggest questions. And we may not know that early on, but for reasonably seasoned companies, you can do that journey. And then really figure out what is the core job to be done of our customer. And I mean the core, like the biggest job to be done. And the nice thing about the jobs to be done framework is it's kind of agnostic of a technology. And so what that does is it forces us into this idea that this job is going to get done anyway. They just happen to be choosing our software to do it. And I think that's the biggest thing. So then if we can start thinking about that, it's like, well, what are the things and just the things we need in our software that will solve that job? Like just the minimum viable packaging, I guess, to solve that particular job to be done. And I think that's how you should start. Because if you start that way, now things become a lot easier, because a customer now is getting full value out of every package. They can solve the job they're trying to get done all the way through. Now, can they solve it as many times as they want? Maybe, maybe not. There could be limits on various things, and that's how you can move people from left to right. And then the other way to move people left to right after that is like, what's the next job to be done once they've solved this job to be done? And then they can start to think about, okay, what are the things that need to go in there? Oftentimes it becomes like insight and analytics and workflows. And that often gets people moving left to right. It's like, how do I do more of what I'm doing more efficiently? And I think in B2B, at least, that's the progression I see, is like, if we can do a really great job of jobs to be done, figure out what they need to do next, and then build in efficiency, productivity, and workflow across the packages, we can get people moving. So that's how I coach people to think about it. Basically, jobs to be done first. It gives you clarity, and you don't have to be fighting about, well, let's remove this and remove that. It's more like, well, do we absolutely need this to solve that job? It's just a different question.
Yeah, that's a great, I like that way. I'm visualizing my own pricing page as you're speaking. So this is excellent.
That's great.
One more question I want to throw out at you, because a lot of folks have a freemium, and I hear in conversations that the approach to freemium is kind of all over the place. So in your opinion, how and when does a free tier really work? And what do companies get wrong or right on their approach to freemium?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really big topic. So like you said, there's lots of different ways of dealing with it. I think what I'll start with is, I see a lot of sales-led growth companies try and switch to almost like a product-led motion, freemium. And I think one of the big things people miss there is around this idea of, how do I get to value as fast as possible? Because if we're going to get people signing up for free, then we need to be able to give them something almost immediately. Like, what is the fastest path to value? And a lot of these sales-led organizations, there could be lots of onboarding. There could be, data ingestion that has to happen, all these other things that really slow that process down. And since it's free, the risk, my return on investment is really not there in my brain as a user. Like, I'm not going, oh, I paid you money for this, I need to get something out of it. I'm like, oh, I created an account. Like, that's it. So we have to be able to get them to value as fast as possible. So I feel like if you can't do that, you need to stay away from freemium, at least until you can do it. Now, on the other side of that, where I think, it works really, really well, is when you have built-in distribution mechanisms into your software. And that's said is, someone signs up and they can get to value, and they just naturally share it with other people. Like, that's sort of the dream of product-led growth, is that, we have all these people that are using it. It's kind of like an extended trial. They're getting tons of value out of it every day. And then eventually they're going to convert, or the sales team is going to see that enough people from XYZ company are using it, and then they reach out and do a bit of a fear play to get them all on side and, rolled into a plan. So I think if the distribution's built in, I think it's worth the investment. Like, it's worth the investment to do it. So one of my favorite examples of this is Notion. Their free plan, they basically give you everything except you can create 1,000 items, I think they call it. And this sort of goes against my, it's a clear word, but nobody really knows what it means. So they have a little hover over there and shows you what it means. So basically anything you put on a Notion page becomes an item. And this is the only time they talk about it, is in this free plan. And basically you can get 1,000 of them. And once you hit up against that, then you need to convert. So that to me is more of the, not free forever, but free for a while till you get to value. Like, until you get to that value, and they figured that's around 1,000, and then you move into paid. And so I think those are great ways of moving people from left to right in sort of a freemium motion. So I'm not sure if that 100% answers your question. It's such a wide topic, but I hope that was helpful.
Well, that's super insightful because oftentimes we're stuck with like, oh, it's going to be 14 days or it's going to be until you want to do X. But in that example you gave, it's someone experiencing value at their pace over time. And then they're deciding, okay, well, now I'm ready to pay for this because I have reached a point where I would like to derive additional value and I'm willing to pay. That's just very insightful because I feel like a lot of times the parameters are a little arbitrary.
Yeah, I mean, free trial, like 7-day free trial, 14-day free trial, really, really common. Builds urgency to get to value, all that kind of stuff. And sometimes you can do it, but other times you just can't. So I'm a fan of usage-based demos or usage-based trials for that reason, is because I want people to get to value. And plus it gives us as a team a ton of more opportunities to surface the features, the value, nurture campaigns. There's a lot of things that can go into it while you have people in the software getting value. Maybe they're just not there yet.
Bill, I feel like I could ask you a million more questions. This has been so great for me personally, and I think our listeners are going to get a lot out of this episode. So thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. It's been a fun time. Thank you so much.
And thanks to all of you for tuning into Closing Time. Remember, you can sign up for the Closing Time newsletter and get these episodes delivered right to your inbox so you don't miss a single one. We'll see you next week.